I'd like to start off this first speech by thanking everybody for coming out here, weathering the kind of inclement weather that we have here in Arkansas. Thanks to the judge. I think he judged me yesterday at team, so looking forward to, hopefully you enjoyed that round just as much as you'll enjoy this one. Okay, the round that we have today is doctors are better than lawyers, so we're just going to go with the straight up definitions. Doctors being kind of medical practitioners are better, or just better for society than lawyers, which is practitioners of law. So practitioners of medicine versus practitioners of law, pretty straightforward. I think we can all agree with that. The weighing mechanism is just benefits to society, which is better for society, doctors or lawyers. Okay, I have several contentions for you today. Let's just jump right into it. Okay, the first scenario I want to have, my first contention is basically pick one. If your society, let's say you're on an island or you're running some new country or something or other, and you can only have doctors or lawyers, which of the two would you prefer? I would say almost universally people are going to go toward doctors. Why? If you don't have a doctor, people are going to be self-administering medicine. You're going to have all kinds of health, disease issues, and all things like that. Whereas if you don't have a lawyer, it's not necessarily a fundamental problem. Another kind of way to think of this is, let's say there's some sort of state of emergency. You got a tornado, you got a hurricane, you got some sort of cataclysmic event. Are people saying, is there a lawyer in the house? No, they're looking for doctors. They're looking for people who are going to actually save lives. So if you're given the option between the two, you always pick the doctor. Also think about it from like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The most fundamental need is to secure life, and all of the rights and things like that are much more higher on the hierarchy of needs, because you need that fundamental health before you need things that lawyers can provide. All right, point number 2 is going to be life expectancy. Life expectancy actually is not really in any way correlated with doctors or anything like that. They can't actually extend your life. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, measuring kind of the life expectancy from in Britain in the early 20th century to nowadays, it jumped from about age 31 to the mid-70s is your life expectancy, over doubling in that time period. And obviously the attributed reason for that, given by Encyclopedia Britannica and basically the rest of the world, it's been proven modern medicine is the reason for that. You don't really see that with doctors. In fact, doctors themselves have like the second highest suicide rate of all professionals worldwide. Okay. Point number 3 is law can still be practiced without lawyers. Like if you don't have a law degree or anything, you can still get those fundamental rights and everything. The examples here are, the fact that when you go and are judged in a court of law or whatever, you're judged by a jury of your peers. Those people don't have any law experience. They don't really practice law in any way. You can still gain all those benefits without having the law degree. Another example of this is self-representation. You don't actually have to have a practitioner of law to go up and represent yourself in a court. So you don't actually get you don't lose all those benefits from not having lawyers. But compare that to self-administration of medicine, and then you get back to kind of the Stone Age arguments of like whether or not, use of leeches, bleeding, and things like that, and all kinds of terrible, nasty stuff. That's what comes about when you don't have those doctors. But you don't need lawyers to actually practice law. Okay. Point number 4 is it's necessary for the development of nations. Think about this perspective. The U.S. Pharmaceutical Convention, as well as many international organizations that promote, are spreading doctors, like Doctors Without Borders and areas like that. They've said that there's a very direct correlation between the number of doctors per capita and the overall well-being or development of that nation. Obviously, this makes sense. If you don't have a lot of doctors, you can't actually develop and create this infrastructure. A lot of times because people are dying and you have to deal with disease and stuff like that, it just very much makes sense, and it's backed up by the statistics. Compare that to lawyers, where there's no real correlation there. The example I provide, obviously the United States has the most lawyers per 1,000 people or whatever. And there we have a very beneficial country, but the next one on the list is Brazil, who actually has 1/5 of the GDP of the United States. So people are economically speaking about 1/5 as, well off as the United States is. There's no direct correlation between the number of lawyers and the betterment of the nation. So, if you have one or the other, you pick the doctor, and if you want more of one or the other, you always want to pick the doctor too, because that benefits your nation as a whole. And then my 5th and final point that I like to end on is the people have spoken. Basically, a Gallup poll, the most trusted professionals are all in the area of medicine, where the most distrusted professionals are the area of law. And that's why NBC says that the School of Law is the most disliked industry in America. Thank you very much.
Go for it.
Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Sir Judy?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. First question, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Second question. Where did you get that tie?
Where did I get that tie?
It's awesome.
I think I got it from my mom for Christmas, actually.
You're an awesome mom. All right. Going back on case. Do we live on a desert island?
No, we don't.
Okay. Do hurricanes and fires, do those things bring about destruction?
Yeah, they do.
Okay. Once they destroy, I'm guessing, our homes or our infrastructure, who do we look for? Who do we look to help us with that?
Well, assuming the doctors, like the medical needs have been taken care of, usually you go with your insurance agency.
Your insurance agency. Okay. All right. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Isn't shelter on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Well, sure it is.
And if you can't provide yourself with shelter, who does that?
Who does that? What do you mean? If you can't get shelter, then
Like if
you
you're
don't
homeless,
have shelter.
if you're homeless, where do you go?
You go, if you're trying to leave me, yeah, sometimes the government provides it. I think that's where you're going with that. And yes, that's sometimes the case.
All right. Life expectancy. You said they can prolong life. Are you familiar with Michael Jackson?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Are you familiar with his death?
Yeah, you're saying the doctor implications and things like that. Yeah, sure, sometimes doctors make mistakes, but I think we can all agree as a whole they're very beneficial to society. Like, that's why they're the most trusted professionals out there.
So also you said doctors have a high suicide rate?
No, lawyers, excuse me.
Lawyers have a high.
Yeah, if I said it the opposite way, it was a misspeech.
Okay, lawyers. All right. Well, I guess off the record. If I actually get the taglines of your points really quickly.
Sure. Pick one. You mind if I did this?
I don't care.
Life expectancy.
Okay. Here we go. 1, 2, 4.
And then law without lawyers.
No. Okay.
Thank you.
I do apologize.
That's fine.
Good afternoon, sir. Adjudicator, thank you for spending your time here with us today in this long and grueling process in judging debates. Thank you, upon for setting up this case. It's a really fun case. I'm glad we came to a consensus on what to debate. So, today we are speaking on if doctors are better than lawyers. In this actual contention, we must find a bright line as to which one is actually better. So we have to understand within this framework, each has its own purpose. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to go directly down his refutations and refute that, and I'm going to go into some of my own points. So, per his weighing criterion, we say which is better for society and which benefits society. In his first point, he says pick one. If you're on a desert island, which one would you pick? However, if you're on a desert island, how would it benefit society? Where's society in anywhere that it would benefit? As I stated earlier, and as my opponent agreed, we do not live on a desert island. We live in the actual governing body, which we call the United States. He said if you had a hurricane or a fire, which one would you look for? And I absolutely agree that if someone was hurt, that we would go to a doctor. And once we are done with that doctor, then I'm looking for how am I going to pay for my house? How am I going to pay for my car? How am I going to pay for if someone dies, these particular expenses? Now, we go to the insurance company. Now, what we have to understand about the insurance company is there to go through legislations and things we have to pay for. Because there's so much paperwork to go through, who do we think sets up those paperwork? The lawyers. The lawyers are actually paid by insurance companies to negotiate proper prices. And that's how these things go about. Now, going down the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he says you need health before you need a lawyer. Now, understand that also in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need shelter. So if a homeless person does not have a particular place to go, he must go to a shelter that's provided by the government. And within the government, we see that is a law-abiding governing thing. That's why we have legislations which are provided by our law system, our judicial system. And so that what provides actual protection for these things. Life expectancy. As I asked my opponent in my cross-examination, he says they prolong life, but I can also show you examples of how being a doctor is detrimental to life. My first example would be Michael Jackson. His doctor killed him. Kanye West's mother, she went in for a nose job and came out dead. A simple nose job, a simple procedure, and she come out with the death. So we can say that it prolonged life, but I can actually turn that and say that it actually takes away life as well. He said law can be practiced without lawyers, and he says you can't practice medicine by yourself. However, so Sir Adjudicator, if I may, if you have a cold, you might not necessarily go to a doctor. You take over-the-counter medicine. If you cut yourself, you have your own Band-Aids. If it need be, you have your own stitches. Military, for example, they're not necessarily doctors specifically on the battlefield. Yet there are doctors in a medical place that you go. However, but if you're shot in the middle of battle, you must deal with that as is. You must deal with it right there. Also, birth. You don't have to go to necessarily go to a hospital in order to have a successful childbirth. You can do that on your own. He says it's necessary for the development of nations. Okay, let's go into this specific nation right now in America. We have the Constitution. We have the Supreme Court. All of these things are made up by bodies of lawyers and legislations, and we need the lawyers to decipher these exact legislations in order for us to understand them. He said U.S. has the most lawyers for 1,000 persons. Sir, this is awesome because we see that we need lawyers not only to fight crime, but to protect ourselves and protect our assets. Now, we have to see that doctors are better than lawyers. Sir Adjudicator, each has its own purpose. So I'm not even here to try to debate if lawyers are better than doctors. I'm saying they're equal. They both have their equal amount in society. Lawyers need doctors for their health, just like doctors need lawyers for their bills, for their wills, for things such as that nature, for their representation. We need lawyers to be our public defenders for people who can't defend themselves. We need lawyers for our wills, for the estate of our loved ones. We cannot make our own will, and if we do make our own will, who's going to enforce that? There's enforcement. That's what these lawyers are here for. Now, I'm here to show you that they are equal, and my opponent has to show that one is significantly better than the other. I have a few examples on the different things and show you that they're pretty much equal and how lawyers aren't that detrimental to society because actually they help society rather than hurt it. Car accidents, you need settlements. You need settlements for these car accidents. You need representation for all of these things. He talks about the building of a nation. We have copyrights. We have copyright infringements. These are things that go to help us in building our own society and building our own nation. Now let's just go to the popularity of each of them. Each actually have their own set of shows. Let's go down. Grey's Anatomy, House. We have Scandal, Matlock, Perry Mason, Boston Legal, Law and Order, Divorce Court, Judge Mathis. Adjudicator, all I'm simply saying to you today, sir, is that one is not better than the other. In fact, they are equal, and my opponent must show that doctors are definitively better than lawyers.
All right, you ready?
Yes, sir.
How you doing today, sir?
I'm just fine.
Good to hear. All right, now let's say you kind of close your speech by talking about like lawsuits and stuff. So let's say you're in a horrific car accident.
Yes.
how useful is a lawyer if you die because there's no doctor to treat you?
How useful is a lawyer if I die?
Yeah. So like, is a doctor
not useful?
Okay, all right. So you need the doctor to save you before you need the lawyer to represent you, right?
Right. Well, so my life. Okay, go ahead.
No, it's fine. Let's just go on to another point. Talking about the government now, who makes the laws in the United States? Say,
Congress.
Congress and the president, right?
Cool.
And they're not required to have a law degree, right? A lot of them are like Ron Paul, who's like a doctor of medicine, right?
Are you familiar with the system of checks and balances?
Sure.
So if they make the law, it has to be constitutional, correct?
Okay.
Who decides if it's constitutional or not?
Okay, you're talking like the Supreme Court. We'll address that in the speech. Talking about, now you said that like under my point number 2 that doctors make mistakes. Do lawyers make mistakes?
Yes.
So they sometimes misinterpret laws and things like that.
I agree.
Is that a reason to completely eliminate the institution of law?
No, it is not.
So you would agree that we probably shouldn't throw out all the doctors just because they sometimes make
I'm
mistakes?
not advocating that we totally eradicate medicine.
Okay, all right. Talking about like the development of nations. So an increase of lawyers doesn't really help a country necessarily, right?
Does increase of doctors necessarily?
Okay, we'll talk about it in the speech too.
Okay.
Now, talking about self-administration, you don't know how to perform like, an appendectomy or something like that, or some sort of life-saving treatment without medical training, right?
No, sir.
Okay, all right, I think that's all the questions I have. Thank you very much, sir. All right, you all set to begin? All right, let's do so. I'd like to start off again, thanks everybody for coming out here. I got a lot of stuff to cover, so I'm going to jump right into it. Now my opponent opens up by saying that, each side has its own purpose. We need doctors, we need lawyers to fill their own purposes. Yes, that's true. However, number one, I'd like to remind you that you need the doctor first before you need the lawyer. Without the doctor, the lawyer is useless if you die or something like that. And secondly, you can have a higher purpose. I mean, like a trash collector and the President of the United States, each have their own purpose. But one you could probably clearly see is more valuable to society than another. If a garbage man forgets to take out the trash one day, it's not a big deal. But if the president screws up, it could mean all-out war. Okay, going on to the individual arguments here. Now he says that where would this we don't live on a desert island, so this argument doesn't really stand here. But I did clearly talk about like states of emergency, which do exist in the real world. You definitely need the doctor before you need the lawyer. Talking about the insurance company's argument he has, their legal contracts were, or contracts and stuff were created before the institution of lawyers and the practice of law. I mean, we can date it back to like the Magna Carta and stuff. There were still documents being signed before the law was being practiced. So you don't need lawyers, again, going back to my one point, saying that you don't need lawyers to practice law. Let's go on to the next point, talking about how the government provides all these things. However, the government operates independently from the law system. I mean, that's why Congress and the President can pass a law, even though none of them are actually lawyers. They don't actually practice law or anything like that. So you can get all these shelter benefits without having lawyers. Going away to the taking away of life, I think we agreed in cross-examination that it's still beneficial to have doctors, and they're very beneficial to society by providing more life than the occasional mistake they make. Just like it's better to have some lawyers, even if they make mistakes too. Definitely they save a lot more lives, and you need those in order to have this. That's why life expectancy goes up with the increase of doctors, but not with lawyers. Okay, the self-administration thing here. My argument here is, yes, you can administer your health sometimes, but you can't perform most life-saving things without doctor training. Whereas you can self-represent yourself in a lawsuit, and again, the jury of your peers, it's much easier to practice law without any sort of formal training than it is to be a self-administered doctor. Talking about, he says, we have to decipher legislation and things. But again, go to the fact that a lot of these, you can decipher legislation on your own, terms. You don't necessarily need a doctor for that. Those laws are being passed by Congress, are being created by mostly people without law degrees. So we can see that that operates independently. You don't need the lawyers to necessarily do that. Now, finally, he ends by talking about how, these things are going to be equally valued. But again, everything is hinged upon that fundamental, that bottom part of the need. You don't need a lawyer until you save your own life, and that's why you need doctors here. Also, my opponent really doesn't address the fact that you have to have more lawyers doesn't really help you in any way, but more doctors helps you develop as a nation and grow as a whole. Thank you very much.
Again. All right, this is my last speech, so I'm going to give the last blanket of thanks and say thank you, adjudicator, for being here with me today. Thank you, opponent, for setting up this great case. We're going back and forth on a lot of things and a lot of issues. So let's just clear it up. The resolution, and he said he's doing it straight up, doctors are more beneficial to society than lawyers. Now, he gives this idea of which one do you need first? So just because I need a lawyer first, does that necessarily mean that I won't, just because I need a doctor first, does that necessarily mean that I won't need a lawyer later? Yes, my life is saved, but if I do not have that lawyer to help me go back for my will, go to bat for me for my belongings, my life insurance, things such as that, I have a life, but my life is in shambles. I might as well have died. I have to go and reconstruct everything from the bottom up when I've worked my entire life for the things that I have. He says, in states of emergency, which would you rather have? We already talked about states of emergency as far as life-threatening things and things such as that. But as I stated earlier, states of emergency also require legal legislation. States of emergency also require I'm sorry, that goes into his actual point. I'm going to get into that later. States of emergency also require lawyers to be present. They also require lawyers to actually make sure that the person gives you that money. I cannot give you that money unless the judge says I have to give you that money. And yes, I can represent myself, but that would be detrimental to myself, as I, a regular citizen, cannot decipher the law in order to protect myself in the best manner. He's saying legal contracts came before the practice of law. Okay, I can agree to that. However, that does not discard and totally eradicate the need for someone who understands law better than I do in order to produce a beneficial outcome. He's saying that Congress and presidents pass the laws. They pass this law, but then what must happen? It has to go through the Supreme Court to see if it is what? Constitutional. The president doesn't decide if it's constitutional. The Congress doesn't decide if it's constitutional. Ordinary citizens do not decide if it's constitutional. The Supreme Court, and if you're on the Supreme Court, I'm sure you have to have some type of law degree, decide if this is constitutional. So we have to understand that someone has to decipher this particular language, this particular lingo, to understand if it's more beneficial for society. He's saying that doctors are beneficial and they save lives. Sir Adjudicator, I can tell you that lawyers save lives as well. People who are on death row, they do not represent themselves. People who are on death row hire lawyers, and lawyers actually go to bat for them and go support their case for them, therefore bringing forth justice and saving their lives at the same time. I could be killed by the government, but my lawyer deciphered the law in order to show a burden of proof that show that I'm innocent beyond a reasonable doubt. Therefore, my life has been saved. Right. So, people who create law, as he restated it, people who create law don't have law degrees, but I already refuted that with a Supreme Court argument. So, let's go back over his points. He's saying life expectancy, he's saying if we live on a desert island, which we don't, if we have emergency situations, and I told you both are actually needed within this grasp. Just because I have, my life has been saved doesn't mean that the things I work for have to go to shambles. Life expectancy, he says that these doctors prolong life. I've already showed you how doctors can take lives as well. They have malpractices. And how do people get justice for the malpractice of medicine? They use lawyers to sue the people. They don't sue them themselves. They don't sue them on some type of whim. They have to actually understand the lingo. And he's saying it is necessary for the development of nations. We have separation of church and state. We have the actual Constitution. These things are things that are being deciphered by lawyers and shows what can and what cannot happen. These things govern the major powers that actually run our society. So is it better for society to not have any laws and just run free just because your life can be saved, so I can kill someone and get away with it, taking their life? The doctor can do nothing about it, but the law keeps that in check, and lawyers enforce the law. So I'm just going to give you a few voters and tell you why you should feel comfortable voting for me, the negative. The first one is, this is an apples to oranges. I'm not necessarily saying that the lawyers are better. I'm not saying we should eradicate law. I'm not saying we should eradicate medicine. All I'm saying is they both have their specific purpose, and both are essential to society as a whole. I'm going to go down a few points of things lawyers have done. They saved Michael Vick's life. They saved O.J. Simpson's life. Ah, man. Well, thank you, and please vote for the negative.
All right, we ready? My opponent ends his speech by saying that, we'd be in a very bad situation without lawyers, and I believe that's absolutely the case. If we were just to eliminate all lawyers, it would be a worse world. We would be a worse world for it. But what we're called for in this resolution here is not to say that lawyers are good or bad for society, but how they can match up compared to doctors. You can either increase one or the other, or have one or the other. What is going to benefit your society the most? That's what we're called upon to do, and I think it's not just apples and oranges. We can actually tangibly prove that it's better, that doctors are better for society than lawyers. That being said, I'm going to agree with all of his points saying that doctors are beneficial and stuff. The only point that I like to refute, I'm kind of grouping his arguments here, but don't let him get away with saying that affirming this resolution means there's not going to be laws. He doesn't respond to my refutation saying that laws are made not by lawyers but by congressmen who oftentimes have no law experience. So we're still going to have the Constitution. We're still going to have all these situations without lawyers because they're not the ones who practice law. Sure, it's going to have a little better implementation and things like that, but the self-administered system, we had contracts, we had laws, we had constitutions before lawyers were developed, and all of those will continue, and we had a pretty stable system back then. What we really need is doctors, and that's why we're going to have those benefits there. Okay, let's look at my 3 voting issues here. Voting issue number 1, self-administration. We're going to compare the 2 systems. Self-administration of law is not that bad. I agree with my opponent. Yes, it's sometimes better to have a lawyer represent you. However, when you talk about jury of your peers and the fact that you can self-represent your law, yeah, you might have a little bit of an edge when it comes to a lawyer, but you're still going to be able to fulfill those necessary functions pretty successfully. However, if you have any sort of disease, a broken bone, you have appendicitis, you have all these kinds of issues, you have no hope if you don't have a doctor. You're just going to go ahead and die. So when you compare the self-administration, we see that yes, it's much better to have doctors than to have lawyers. When it comes right down to it. Voting issue number 2 is choose one or the other. Let's go back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing that I was pointing out again. Again, he can't claim the advantages of government because of my refutation saying that laws can be created without lawyers and stuff. But when it comes down to it, if you're alive, it's better to be alive and have your will be a little bit jumbled up or something because you're creating your own will or something, than to be dead and have your it go to the right person or whatever. It's better to be alive. That's why it's a more fundamental on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and stuff. So it's better to have doctors than to have lawyers. Now, if you can increase one or the other, and this is one point that my opponent really hasn't addressed very adequately in his speech, if you increase the number of lawyers, it doesn't benefit your society at all. That's why Brazil isn't really even close to the United States, even though they have a comparable amount of lawyers. If you increase the doctors, there's a direct relationship to an increase in development of your country. So if you can have one or the other, you pick the doctors, and if you can increase one or the other, you pick the doctors. Thank you.